Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and botanical literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is April 1st. Happy April Fool's Day and the 4-year anniversary of the show. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birth of Anthelme Brillat-Savarin, the French lawyer and politician who was born on this day, April 1st, in 1755. Jean became a famous epicure and gastronome. In his book, The Physiology of Taste, he wrote, "A man who was fond of wine was offered some grapes for dessert after dinner. 'Much obliged,' said he, pushing the plate aside. 'I am not accustomed to taking my wine in pills.'" And today we celebrate the birthday of Miles Joseph Berkeley, the English cryptogamist and clergyman. He was born on this day, April 1st, in 1803. Miles is regarded as a founder of plant pathology, and as a young man, he became passionate about lichens. He pursued his botanical work around his duties as a pastor, and he coined the term mycologist to describe his work with nature. Today, Webster's describes a mycologist as someone who works with fungi, which are living organisms like molds, yeast, and mushrooms. And while many of his fellow clergymen believed that the potato famine was a tool of the devil, Miles correctly suspected that a water mold, Phytophthora infestans, could be the source of the problem. And here's a little fun fact about Miles Joseph Berkeley. He named a mushroom species Agaricus ruthi after his darling daughter Ruth, and she grew up to become a successful botanical illustrator, and you might have heard of her. Her name was Ruth Ellen Berkeley. And today we wish a happy heavenly birthday to the American physician and scholar George Edward Post, who was born on this day, April 1st, in 1838. George was a missionary, a professor, and a pioneering doctor in Syria, Beirut, and Lebanon. And in his spare time, he botanized the countryside, and he also wrote the very first English flora of the Middle East. George is remembered for his extensive herbarium. His students actually helped him with his collecting efforts. George would assign 200 herbarium sheets per student and then reward the kids who traveled the furthest to obtain specimens. Well, there are many incredible stories about George Post. Supposedly, he could outwork most men, and he could fall asleep very quickly. George Post lore tells how George could also collect specimens without getting off his horse. He got very good at leaning down low on the side of his saddle to grab a specimen for his study. I would have loved to see that. Well, finally, as George lay dying at the end of his life, a visitor came by and placed some wheat in his hand. The wheat was symbolic of the harvest and George's lifetime of work with plants, a very sweet gesture. And today we also celebrate the birthday of Edmond Rostand, the very dapper-looking French poet and dramatist who was born on this day, April 1st, in 1868. Edmond built a villa that he called Arnaga in Cambu-les-Bains, France. The beautiful gardens cover 37 acres, and Edmond was very thoughtful about his garden designs. He planned the French garden on the east side of the property to greet the rising sun. And then he put an English garden on the west side to enjoy the setting sun. Such thoughtfulness. Well, Edmond called Arnaga his poem of stone and greenery, and it's often referred to today as Little Versailles in Basque Country. And today, the villa and the gardens get 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor. But now this whole time that we've been talking about Edmond and his beautiful garden and his villa, I have been remiss in letting you know about his most famous work, because Edmond Rostand is best known for his 1897 play, Cyrano de Bergerac. And in the play, Edmond wrote this garden-inspired verse: "My soul be satisfied with flowers, with fruit, with weeds even, but gather them in the one garden you may call your own." One of my favorite verses. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Patina Farm by Steve and Brooke Giannetti. This book came out in March of 2016, so it's been out for 6 years already, and this book has been on my watch list now for quite some time, and used copies have finally dipped below $20, so I am thrilled to share this with you on today's show. But let me just start out by saying that the cover of Patina Farm is so stunning. It's one of my favorite covers. When I saw the cover, I could not stop thinking about it. I love the use of dried flowers and flower arrangements on the cover. I love the cutting boards that are over the mantle and the beautiful teal slip-covered chairs. All of the natural elements that come together to make this gorgeous cover. And then, of course, there is the incredibly inspiring story of Steve and his wife, Brooke, because they decided to leave suburbia. They were living in Santa Monica, and then they decided to just leave the city and build a new life for themselves on a farm. And what they did is they went to Europe to find their inspiration for their farm. So they went to Belgium and France, and then they combined their talents to create the farm and then share what they did in this book. Now, Steve is kind of the architect. He puts together all of the architectural drawings. You can see those in the book. And then Brooke is the writer. She's got the gorgeous writing and over 200 photographs that they share in this book. And don't you love the way that they named their farm, Patina Farm? I absolutely love that. They dedicated the book to their children, Charlie, Nick, and Lila. And in the dedication, they said that their kids give their dreams meaning, which is so touching. The other thing I like about this book is how they share their journey in the titles of each chapter. So there's arriving, connecting, nourishing, creating, restoring, rejuvenating, sharing, and then farming. And then they give abundant resources at the end too, so that if there's something that you're particularly inspired by, you can track down the resources that they used. But this is a total eye candy book. If you're a gardener, you're going to swoon at this book. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. And like I said, it's one of my favorite books. It's got all of the things that I love in it. Beautiful, beautiful elements, both natural and man-made. And it all comes together to create tranquil, inspiring Patina Farm, which, by the way, has not one, but 2 courtyards. Isn't that a dream come true? I love that. Now, the other thing that you're going to enjoy by getting this book is you will quickly realize how down-to-earth Steve and Brooke are. Even though they've created this incredible jaw-dropping space, these guys are salt of the earth, and they're just so generous in sharing how they came about the plans and the ideas behind this space. I also want to just take a quick second and read to you a little bit about what Clinton Smith said about this book. He is the editor-in-chief of Veranda, and he wrote the foreword. He wrote, "On 5 acres in the heart of the Ojai Valley in California is a place that has emerged over the past 3 years as the best case study of confident design married with passion and purpose. It's not as over-the-top or attention-seeking as some homes. In fact, it excels in understatement. Hidden from street view by a bank of white roses, the house and landscape treated as one, fosters a respect for nature, for space, for light and air, and everyday moments. When you're at Patina Farm, you feel it through the waft of lavender in the backyard, the sound of crunching pea gravel underfoot on the back terrace, boughs of freshly cut lemons on the kitchen island, the jolly nature of miniature donkeys, and silky bantam chickens that have the run of the place. And while the owners didn't set out to create a Biltmore or Monticello, and why would they, there are indeed similarities. Well, I could go on gushing about this book, but I trust that you get the drift. This book is 176 pages, but I wish there were 500 pages, to be honest, of Patina Farm, because I can't get enough of it. You can get a copy of Patina Farm by Steve and Brooke Giannetti and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $18. Hooray! All right, we end today's show with a botanic spark that dates back to this day, April 1st in 2013. And it was on that day that 9 graduation speeches by Kurt Vonnegut were collected and then published posthumously in a book that was called If This Isn't Nice, What Is? Advice for the Young. It's one of my favorite books to give graduating seniors or people celebrating major milestones. I'll put a link to it in today's show notes. But in one of the speeches, Kurt gave his take, his very unique take on the seasons. And that's what I wanted to share with you today to end today's episode. So here's what Kurt said on seasons. One sort of optional thing that you might do is to realize that there are 6 seasons instead of 4. The poetry of 4 seasons is all wrong for this part of the planet, and this may explain why we are so depressed so much of the time. I mean, spring doesn't feel like spring a lot of the time, and November is all wrong for fall, and so on. Here's the truth about seasons. Spring is May and June. What could be springier than May and June? Summer is July and August. Really hot, right? Autumn is September and October. See the pumpkins? Smell those burning leaves. Next comes the season called locking. That is when nature shuts everything down. November and December aren't winter, they're locking. Next comes winter, January and February. Boy, are they ever cold. What comes next? Not spring. Unlocking comes next. What else could April be? Happy April Fool's Day. Well, that's it for today's show. Just remember that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.